Hello, it's Tom and Finn here. Finn's just down here having a rest. So we've got to chapter 27, which means we've got, I think, have we read chapter 26? Yes, 27. So chapter 27, we're going to read now chapter 27, 28, 29, 30, 31 and 32, which is, although it sounds a lot, it is 6 chapters, but it's about 25 pages. So I'm just going to read that now all in one lot, because I know some schools are finishing. I think it's important we get finished. So you can always break it up. I hope that's okay. But we'll see how we get on. So chapter 27. Day 3, after breakfast, Mr. Salah asked Jack to sit with Lucas and Cassandra on the journey to Pegasus Bridge. But the driver, who had been standing near Jack since he'd come out of the house, smoking 2 or 3 cigarettes, one after the other, overheard. "Not possible, sir," the driver intervened, coughing. "I'm not done with this one yet." Mr. Salah shrugged and made Jack sit up front again. Deep down, Jack was quite pleased. "You asked me why I did it," the driver said, turning to Jack once they were on the road. "Yes," Jack leaned forward in his chair. "If I tell you," the driver said, "will you do something for me in return?" "Okay, you promise?" "I do." Jack was desperate to know now. Why did soldiers do what they did? Maybe if he understood the driver's actions, he would be able to understand what Courtiel had done, and he might understand his dad more clearly too. "It was thrilling," the driver started. "The best buzz ever. It was what I trained for all my adult life, to fight in a war for my country. I was being how I wanted to be, but also..." "Yeah?" Jack said. "Well, also, it was the most frightening day of my life. As I dropped into the cold and wet and dark, I expected a bullet to hit me. And when I landed, I expected a bayonet to be thrust at me, or to step on a mine, to suffer some sort of slow, painful death, and it terrified me. And yes, I actually did feel like an idiot." "So why did you do it?" Jack asked. "Because I was fighting for my country," as the driver said, "and even more for the men either side of me on the plane." "Even though you were scared?" "Even more so," the driver said. "Sometimes that makes it easier. If you're scared, you know, it's important." Jack nodded. Neither of them spoke for a minute. The coach drew up in a small glass-fronted building. Sorry, the dog's digging the carpet. Finn, will you stop it? What are you doing? Will you just settle down? Good boy. Right, where were we? Jack nodded. Neither of them spoke for a minute. The coach drew up beside a small glass-fronted building with a large metal structure behind it. Jack was surprised. He'd not noticed where they had driven. He'd been so involved with the conversation with the coach driver. They had arrived at Pegasus Bridge Museum. It was time to get off. "So, now you have to do something for me," the driver clapped Jack gently on the back. "Oh, what?" Jack said. "This museum is about a group of men who dropped down onto this very strip of land by the canal in gliders." The driver pointed at the canal. "They had to capture a bridge, hold it, so the German army couldn't come over it and attack the Allies as they made their beach landings. The men in the gliders knew they had a good chance of being killed, but they still did it. They wanted to stop Hitler and do the right thing because they could, even if it cost them their lives." Jack noticed a wobble in the driver's voice. He said nothing. "If you want to go around this museum," the driver continued, "and I want you to think about what you hear and what you see, then I want you to come out and tell me if you think those men, Emile Courtiel and me, for that matter, are idiots. I want you to make up your own mind. Deal?" Jack frowned. He didn't have much choice. He'd made a promise. "Deal," he said. Chapter 28. The museum was small and dwarfed by the massive grey bridge in the clearing behind it. Next to that stood a large wooden glider, about the same size as the coach they had been travelling in, but with wings. One side of the museum there was a canal, on the other a river. Inside, display panels and objects in glass cases told the story of the brave British soldiers who had landed on this narrow strip to stop the Germans transporting troops to the beaches to attack the Allies. At the centre, there was a huge 3-dimensional model of the area, showing the Merville Battery Pegasus Bridge, Ronville. The children gathered round it, pressing buttons to illuminate different places on the battlefield. Photographs were projected onto a screen around a 3D map, and Jack looked at the faces of these men who felt like real people to him now, courageous soldiers doing what they thought they should do, like a coach driver had told him. Their faces were determined, all fixed jaws and fiery stares, determined to defeat Hitler and the Nazis, to stop what they were going to do in Europe and the world. Jack knew now that they were not idiots or stupid, quite the opposite. He felt confused about how he wanted to feel. Then he remembered something Mr. Saller had said earlier in the trip. They were prepared to risk their lives to try to drive the Nazis back into Germany, to save millions of people who were dying and suffering under German rule in Europe. Jack could see that sense of purpose in their faces on the screens. He could see their fear too. Jack felt a chill run up his spine. Was this what Emil Cortial would have looked like that night he jumped with Glenn? So determined to defeat Hitler, knowing he needed Glenn with him. And what about Jack's own dad? What was his reason to wanting to be a soldier? To feel like that? To do something good? Not something bad? Wasn't that what Jack's dad had learned watching war films with his own dad? Now Jack got it. He understood. These were young men, like the coach driver had been years before with his friends, putting their lives at risk, not because they liked war and wanted to kill, but because they thought they were doing the right thing. To stop Hitler, to change the course of history. Jack felt tears on his cheeks. He was crying, and Jack hated crying, especially in front of other children. He wanted his dad, right now, right here, and Finn. He wanted Finn. He stumbled into a corner, coming right up against the display board, showing more pictures of paratroopers, dozens of young men who had dropped into this exact place to do what they thought was right. Jack focused his eyes only to see he was looking at a photograph. He stepped back, shocked. It was like it was meant to be. He wiped his sleeve across his face and stared hard at the photograph. A young man was wearing a paratrooper's beret and uniform. He was staring back at Jack, his legs apart, with a fierce look of determination on his face. Next to him, a German shepherd dog, ears back. I've just got that picture to show you. So that's the picture in the back of the book that you can see. That's the picture that Jack sees when he goes into the museum. Ears back, Emil Cortial and Glenn. Jack stood and stared. He wasn't sure for how long. He was trying to piece together the details of what had happened to Glenn and Cortial, to tell himself that story again. He felt himself shiver. He heard a voice, Lucas, calling his name. "I'm here." Jack turned to call back and saw Lucas and Cassandra coming round the corner. "There he is. Jack, you okay?" asked Lucas. "I'm fine. I was just looking at this. Come and see. I want to show you." Lucas came to stand right next to Jack, their shoulders touching. Cassandra stood behind them, looking above between their heads. "You found them," she said. "Is that Emil and Glenn?" "Yes." Jack felt a shiver pass along his arms. He looked down to see the hairs on his arms were raised. "Yes," he said. "I found them." Chapter 29. "Tell me what happened to Glenn," the driver said. "What?" They were back on the coach now, heading for the final destination on day 3 of their trip. Jack chose to sit with the driver again. They'd had unfinished business. "Tell me," the driver repeated. "You've not said. I know he was a D-Day paradog, but I don't know what happened to him." Jack coughed. He was worried he would cry again. "I don't really want to talk about it," he said. "Look, Jack," the driver said. "Museums and trips like this are about learning what happened and then passing that message on to others, so that war doesn't have to happen so much. I know you get that now, so pass it on. You have a duty. Tell me what happened to Glenn." Jack could remember everything he had read in the library book. Every word, every detail. He'd spent days trying not to think about it, trying to imagine those things happening to Finn. But now, it was weird. Now the driver had said what he had said. Jack felt a huge need to tell the story and share what he had learned. After he threw Glenn out of the plane, Cortiel jumped as well, Jack said. He put a light on Glenn's harness so he could follow him down. They landed. It was dark. It was hard to judge what they were landing on. Some paratroopers landed in fields that had flooded. Several men drowned, suffocating under their parachutes. But not Courtiel and Glenn, the driver asked. No, they landed in marshy fields, flooded but not deep water, Jack went on. But they were a long way from where they should have been. They had these clicker things to communicate. They sounded a bit like insects, and it was a way of knowing you had friends, not enemies around you. So they formed a small group, the driver asked. Yes, Jack said. The main officer gathered all the men he could find and led them to a narrow track with hedges on either side. It was dead quiet. They had no idea where the enemy troops would be. Courtiel was at the front with Glenn. Glenn was sniffing the air, smelling out the Germans. That was his job. Different nationalities smell different. It's because of what you eat, what you wear, what you wash with, everything and anything. Good, the driver said. Tell me what happened to Jack. Sorry. Tell me what happened to Jack. Sorry, I thought that was a misprint. Sorry, I'll start again. Good. Tell me what happened to Jack, the driver said. And Glenn was supposed to sniff out mines too, bombs buried underground, which would go off if you trod on them. Right. The Allies were dropping bombs on the beaches before dawn, Jack said, making it harder for the Germans to defend them. And fighter planes were searching the area for the beaches and enemy troops, and may have mistaken Courtiel's group for Germans. Glenn heard them first. He stood still, so Glenn knew he had heard something. Courtiel put his arm up, and the man behind him squatted, expecting to be shot at. Then they heard the planes coming. The men tried to scatter off the track because they knew what was coming, but they couldn't escape because the hedgerows were too thick. Jack stopped and watched the driver swallow, eyes fixed on the road as he drove. And Jack took a deep breath. Half the men were killed by friendly fire. Glenn and Courtiel died instantly. I see, the driver said, dropping down a gear as he prepared to turn the bus right into a village called Ronville. There's one more thing, Jack sniffed. Tell me, the driver said. They found Courtiel with his hand still gripping Glenn's lead. They were still together, even after they were killed. The coach had stopped. Where are we? Jack coughed. Ronville Cemetery, the driver said. Right, Jack said, felt exhausted. Listen, Jack, the driver said, you told that story well. You know what I said about coming to places like this in museums and hearing stories about the past, how important it is to help us understand. Yeah, Jack said. Well, you've done it in your story. You've told a story that is sad, terrible things happening to a young man and a dog. But you've shown how brave they were, and they were trying to do the right thing. Emil was doing it to help liberate his father's homeland. He was doing it for a good reason, trying to defeat the Nazis, and together they helped get that job done. They played a part in the liberation of France, even though it cost them their lives. Jack nodded. He was suddenly flooded with a feeling of pride. He was proud of Courtiel as well as Glenn. He felt close to them, connected to them, and now he had a deep desire to pay his respects to Courtiel. Jack fumbled with his folder to take out his wooden cross. He put his hand inside. It wasn't there. Jack tipped his folder upside down onto his lap, checked each booklet and piece of paper, searching for his cross. He hadn't wanted to plant the cross at Courtiel's grave, but now, after everything he had seen and learned in Normandy, it felt really important to do so. But the cross had gone. What is it? The driver asked. Nothing. Jack shrugged and climbed off the bus. Chapter 30, and there's 3 chapters left, including this one. Year 6 stood at the entrance to Ronville Cemetery. It was a bright but cool evening. The stone arch and the entrance was in shadow, but beyond it, among hundreds of graves, a tall marble cross was illuminated by the evening sun. Okay, Mr. Saller was speaking. Ronville Cemetery. This is our last stop. Then we have a short drive to the ferry port. Okay? Yes, sir, Year 6 said as one. We will have 1 hour here, Mr. Saller went on, where each of you can go and find your soldier's grave and plant your cross. Then I will lead a short service of remembrance. Then we must go. Our ferry leaves in 3 hours. Jack looked at his crossmates clutching their crosses, some of them appearing emotional. After he let them all go ahead of him, Jack stumbled through a tall marble gateway with a short wall on either side. In one side of the wall was a stone which had the words Rawnville War Cemetery, and neatly carved. Ahead was a block of white gravestones, each about a metre high, in rows and in columns, all set on lush green lawns. The cemetery was surrounded by trees. Walking behind Lucas, Jack read the gravestones as they moved past them. D.R. Hartley, Parachute Regiment, aged 19, one of the bravest, one of the best. R.F. Johns, Parachute Regiment, 24. He died as he lived, fearless. P.G. Sampson, aged 21. Our son gave his life to make the world a better place. Jack felt terrible. He read the last one again. Our son gave his life to make the world a better place. It was true. Jack knew it was true. He felt a tear tickle his cheek. He looked out across the cemetery and saw single children or small groups squatting at different graves. He could hear the soft murmur of their voices reading the inscriptions. Jack walked with Lucas, who quickly found his grave he was looking for and planted his cross. After a few minutes, Jack decided to join the others for the service, cursing himself for not looking after his cross. He was shocked now by the number of dead as he took in the size of the cemetery. Block after block after block of graves, 200 or 300 in each block. There were thousands of them. Jack stopped just for a second to get his head round the numbers. Every one of these dead men had been someone's son or even father. Then he carried on walking towards the centre. Mr. Salah was standing in a semicircle with some Year 6 children. They read out letters written by soldiers during the war. Mrs. Mace played the last post on her flute. All of this took place as the setting sun sent ripples of light through the leaves of a huge tree. Jack could smell cut grass. 2 pupils had been chosen to lay a wreath at the cross at the centre in the semicircle of children. As they walked solemnly forward, Jack noticed that Mr. Salah was looking up at the sky, his jaw fixed, trying to control his emotions. Jack bowed his head, trying to breathe properly. His legs felt weak. He felt someone come up and stand behind him. But he didn't turn round. It didn't seem right to do anything other than look at the ground. He felt like a fool for not looking after his cross. He was desperate now to plant it. Then he heard a voice. So, 2 chapters left. And all this, before I go on, all this is based on I went on a school trip with Asheville College in Harrogate, and they taught me, and all this is based on what they did and what happened, and I've added a few bits and bobs, but I hope it feels like a real sort of ceremony because it's based on a real ceremony. 31. You dropped this back at school. The bus driver handed Jack an envelope. The grave is the first block on the right, he said. Jack took the envelope and felt what was inside through the paper, a thin piece of wood in the shape of a cross. Jack looked at the driver. He had his cross. He could place it at Cortiel's grave. Thanks, he said, keeping his jaw tight like Mr. Salah. The driver winked. Listen, Cortiel's not his own in there. Glenn's in the grave too. Jack turned. Both of them. In the grave. Together. He felt himself smile. He walked a few paces and stopped. Jack could tell which grave it was. 4 people stood around it, another kneeling. Cortiel was one of the more well-known soldiers buried here, because of his story, because of Glenn. If graves could be popular, this one was. Jack waited until the people were ready to leave. He didn't want to plant his cross with anyone else around. Well, anyone except his friends. Lucas and Cassandra stood with him as he waited, saying nothing. When all was clear, he walked briskly to the grave to find it had 6 crosses already planted in its dry soil, and flowers, and a photograph of Glenn. Jack read. 1441-0713. Private E.S. Cortiel. Parachute Regiment, Army Air Corps, 6th of June 1944, age 19. Had you known our boy, you would have loved him too. Glenn, his parachute dog, was killed with him. Jack planted the cross, feeling the soil crumble easily as he pushed it into the ground. He wondered if he should say something. He'd seen films where people went to graves and spoke, but he didn't really know what to say. And he coughed and stared at the ground, read the inscription at the bottom of the grave, coughed again. He wanted to speak, to say something. The graveyard was quiet. Just the odd murmur of a voice. Otherwise, there was only the sound of bells and the wind rustling in the branches and the leaves. I'm sorry, Jack said. I'm blaming you for Glenn. And I wanted to say thank you for doing what you did, both of you. Jack looked at Lucas and Cassandra. Thank you, too, he said. His two friends smiled back at him. Now we have to go and plant Cassandra's cross, Lucas said. Miss Carn said she could take the three of us over to the graveyard next to the church. Lucas took Cassandra's hand and led her to his support teacher. Jack followed. Right, one chapter left, chapter 32. And then that is the end. I've got to say, I find it quite emotional reading this, because when I was writing it, I really had to get into the story of Glenn and Emil, and I had to get into the story of Jack as well, and really feel their emotions. And it's weird because I wrote this book 2 years ago, but it's really bringing it back now. And I'm feeling quite strong emotions, but that's good, because books. Look at all these books I've written. All these books, not I've written, sorry, but other people have written. These books are full of stories, and they're emotional. When I read them, I feel emotions, and part of why I read is because I feel emotional, and I like it. I like feeling happy and involved when I'm reading a story, and that's why I think it's one of the main reasons I like reading. Anyway, I'll crack on. Chapter 32, the last chapter. In the coach on the way back to the ferry, I'll start again. In the coach on the way to the ferry terminal, Jack, shall we finish with Finn? Shall I see if I can get Finn for the last chapter? Finn, what's this? Ooh, come on. No, come on, play along just for this. It's the last chapter. And I don't think the children will be very happy if you're not. You hear him wheezing. Right. Here we go, it's the last chapter. Then you don't have to do this anymore. In the coach on the way to the ferry terminal, Jack was allowed to go back and sit with Lucas and Cassandra. As they sat there chatted, Jack felt his phone buzz in his pocket. It was a photo of Finn with his mum. There was a lake in the background. There was no way this could be a selfie. Jack smiled. His mum and dad must be together. Probably. What did that mean? Were they okay now? Had they sorted everything out like they promised they would? And what had Dad decided to do? Jack frowned. He couldn't wait to see his dad now, to tell him about the trip, to hear whether he decided to go to Afghanistan or not. Right, come here. I need you to read this with me. It's really important. Back in England, Jack asked Mr. Salah if he could sit up front with the coach for the last hour of the journey. He wanted to talk to the driver, ask him more about what it'd been like being a paratrooper. It meant that when the bus turned into the school car park at 7 o'clock that evening, Jack was well placed to see the parents waiting. He saw Lucas's mum first, wringing her hands like she had been when they'd left. He saw Cassandra's mum in her green headscarf, her eyes glistening. Then he saw his mum. She was on her tiptoes, staring along the top deck of the coach as it drew up. Jack looked at the ground by his mum. Emerging from the forest of feet was Finn. Yay, Finn! Not panicking, not pulling on his lead, not even thrashing from side to side like he had been when they left. He was staring directly at Jack, eyes locked, tail wagging. That's you. Then suddenly he was pulling, almost snatching the lead out of Mum's hand. Jack grinned. See my dog, he said to the driver. The driver laughed. He almost pulled your dad's hand off. What? Jack said. Your dad's hand. He almost pulled it off. Sorry, that is your dad, right? Jack looked again. The hand was holding Finn's lead could not be his mum's, as she was waving both her hands now to the children above. It is, Jack said, with a grin widening on his face. Jack couldn't believe it. He'd hoped for it, but not expected it. He felt sure now that whatever destination, he felt sure now that whatever decision his dad had made about Afghanistan, his family would stay together, and that was the most important thing. The driver pulled the handbrake on and looked at Jack. "Jump off, looks like your dog needs to see you." Jack looked at Finn scrabbling at the door. He could hear his sharp barks now. Jack pulled the door open to be met by a frenzy of paw and fur and a dog's mouth chewing his hands and going for his ears. Jack took control of Finn and remembered to turn to the driver. "Thanks," he said. And that is the end of D-Day Dog. Well done hanging in there. So in the back of the book, if you can find it in the library or at school, there's a picture of Glenn and Emil. In fact, on my website, tompalmer.co.uk, D-Day Dog, where you'll find it on the website, there's loads of resources and films of me in places in the book, so in the places where the book happens. There's films of that. There's also some questions and some other bits and bobs in the back that you can find out more about the history. So, thank you very much. If you've made it all this way, well done. 32 chapters reading that. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I think Finn's enjoyed it at times, but not always. But he's getting better. I think he's better at getting better at concentrating like you. So we'd both like to say a big thank you. Look into the camera just for one last minute. We'd like to say a big thank you for listening, and we'd also like to send you and your family best wishes for the summer. I hope everything works out really well for you and your family, and you get to have a good time. Thank you very much for staying with us for this whole story, and Finn's going now, so I'd better join him. Thank you.